Hi.
Hello again. In the finished mystery, we've got a couple of pages now, actually on a new text. We've spent, six or seven pages just on one verse, which was Revelation 6, verse 4.
Yeah.
Now they're moving on to verses 5 and 6. So we want to recapitulate here and go back to the beginning of the chapter just so you get the flow, because the whole chapter is about, they say, it's entitled Six Seals and the Papacy. So you know what their preferred narrative is right away. This has to do with the history of the Catholic Church, according to the Watchtower. So let's read the first 6 verses that have to do with the first 3 seals.
Okay. And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a voice like thunder, Come. And I saw and look a white horse, and the one seated on it had a bow, and a crown was given him. And he went out conquering and to complete his conquest. When he opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature say, Come. Another came out, a fiery-colored horse, and it was granted to the one seated on it to take peace away from the earth, so they should slaughter one another. And he was given a great sword. When he opened the 3rd seal, I heard the living creature say, Come. And I saw and look a black horse, and the one seated on it had a pair of scales in his hand. I heard what sounded like a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures say, A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the olive oil and the wine.
So we won't bore you with the next 2 pages of material, because basically all of it has been scrapped in the wake of the disappointment in 1914. Excuse me. The 1914 disappointment. All of this preferred narrative about it being the history of the Catholic Church from Constantine basically onwards, all gone. And even what now you take for granted if you're a witness, which is the red horse has to do with war.
Yeah.
And Christ being enthroned somehow invisibly in 1914 is the first horse, and the 2nd horse is the war, and the 3rd horse, famine.
Yeah.
Very plainly in the text, it's about famine. But what are you going to do with that if you've got your papal narrative?
Yeah.
Well,
So
you're going to make it all about spiritual reality, spiritual famine, which is what they do.
Yeah, they say in the book, this is the 3rd epoch in the history of the Antichrist.
What are they talking about there? Well, if you go to the next page, 113, you realize they're making a parallel with the 7 churches. They assume that the 7 churches of Revelation 2 and 3 are 7 epochs or eras.
Yeah.
And of course, the Catholic Church dominates those eras according to the former view. And the Antichrist is the papacy.
Yeah.
So no surprise when you get to the particulars here that they have basically the Pope riding all the horses. But that's all gone in the wake of World War I. You got a more realistic view, which is actually the traditional Christian view, that it does have to do with literal war, a literal going forth of Christ to proclaim the gospel anyway, a literal war through the Middle Ages and into the Reformation period, and literal famine and disease.
Yeah.
So, in other words, you line it more up with what you have in Matthew 24,
In here,
where it is about
all
famine.
of these things are given spiritual meanings. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the horror to me, though, is beyond your insistence that all of this has to do with your enemy, who in those days, of course, you viewed the Roman Catholic Church as your principal enemy, and Christendom as your enemy, not the world empire of false religion. But beyond even that, there's this doublethink going on about Jesus Christ and what he's been doing this whole time.
So they describe him as the infinite love, but they say he's got apparent inaction.
Yeah, well, let's look at that sentence again. I can barely read it. It says
Come
something.
and see the apparently complete triumph of the powers of darkness and the apparent inaction of the infinite love in permitting it,
Well, when they say infinite love, of course, they're comparing the beasts that are around the throne to the attributes of God. So they're saying infinite love, of course, is what God has done through Christ, but it's virtually inactive.
Yeah, apparent.
Apparently inactive for what? 1,300, 1,400, 1,500 years?
And yeah.
Till
and
you
yet
came along?
they do reference the text that says that Christ would be with us all the days.
Yeah, that's at the top of page 113, reference to 6:6. I heard, as it were, a voice. And then they say, the voice of the Lord Jesus, the guardian, capital G, and caretaker, capital C, of the true church, capital C.
Yeah.
But what is he doing? Obviously, you've already
You've said
placed doubt that he's
yeah. There's no activity going on. They're just letting the devil take
so
over.
how is he guardian of the church, and how is he taking care of the church?
Mm-hmm.
If indeed the church has become the devil's playground for better part of two millennia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then there's the stuff about Latin, which I thought was, yeah, it does fit your narrative. Somehow you have to make the villain the papacy, and the papacy is about the Latin language. This is a pretty common Protestant point of view back in the day. Not any longer, but it was then. So you've taken over the Protestant criticism that it's somehow, even the 666 number, has something to do with Latin. But what you've said shows a complete lack of depth of penetration into the history of Christianity. Who is it that translated the Bible into all of the languages of the world?
Christendom.
Yes, not just the Catholics, but the Catholics had something to do with it. And when Christianity went into Northern Europe and Eastern Europe and into what we now call the Soviet Union or Russia, when Christianity went in those directions, the local languages were used. The first dictionaries of many of these languages were often used or created because you needed a way to communicate the faith to people in the language that they understood. So Latin is not the dominant language all over the world, though you would think it would be.
From this.
From
they
this.
don't mention the Eastern churches at all.
And what did the Eastern churches contribute? Well, they kept Greek. And a lot of the Eastern churches are still doing either the Greek itself, the Greek Orthodox, or the Coptic languages, or Russian Orthodox, Ukrainian. So the Bible has been translated liturgically and in terms of the text into many languages, but the essential, the core of it is the preservation of the Greek itself, which is still in the Eastern tradition. Not a mention of that here, despite the fact that hundreds of millions of people obviously benefited over the centuries from this. So you realize it's really all about their preferred narrative, namely that let's get a hate on to Christendom, specifically the Catholic Church. I think we should emphasize again, though, their surety about this all being predicted by the seven churches of Revelation 2:3 and by the six seals. So basically the 6 or 7 seals and the 7 churches tell the same story, which is, in the old days, your preferred narrative that this all would be up to 1914, and now you've chucked it all, and it's become about what's happened since 1914, which means the papal angle is lost completely. What's our link?
We're linking to the Laterat playlist, which you went through the whole book, so...
I'm working on it.
Yeah. Oh, you're still working on it.
It's over 1,500 pages long. So we've been working on it for about 4 years already.
But that's the cure, is to look at somebody who knows church history and can give you what was happening.
Yeah, to get the particulars and the specific details, you need something of that scope. Laterat's History of Christianity, which is now way over 100 videos, but will be at least 400, I predict, by the time we get through it. He's going in sufficient depth that you miss... all the stuff they miss in here, he covers in terms of the particulars and the specifics as to how the gospel got across the world.
And we'll give you one from his playlist as well on Jerome.
Jerome,
the Bible translator.
the first great Bible scholar. See you next time.